समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Note the date today, 8th of July. This is an interesting date to raise a trick question on the politics of our times. What's the question? Who should have been the weakest prime minister in our history? I didn't say who was the weakest prime minister in our history. I said who should have been the weakest prime minister in our history. And this is a trick question because of the twist here, because I didn't ask you the full question. The question is completed as who should have been the weakest prime minister in our political history and yet turned out to act as if the strongest or as if among the strongest. I will offer you another clue. This is the 8th of July. That's the reason we said this is an interesting day to raise this question. This is the death anniversary of one of our prime ministers. Think of a man who was prime minister for just 7 months, 3 of which were as the head of a caretaker government. It left him effectively just 4 months in power. He only had a strength of 54 MPs in Lok Sabha. That would today be little bit less than 1/10 of Lok Sabha, which was like his government was like a scrawny tail while the dog, the Congress, stayed outside the ring. And didn't that tail wag spectacularly? Usually you say tail wagging the dog, but in this case, the tail itself wagged spectacularly. This prime minister took decisions that those with full majorities and 5-year terms would have found daunting. He allowed American military aircraft refueling rights as they flew from their Indian Ocean bases, especially Diego Garcia, to participate in the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein, to liberate Kuwait. That was the first Gulf War. Three full-term prime ministers after him have dithered over signing a military logistic support agreement with America until the Modi government did it now. The Congress, in fact, had made a ruckus in parliament when that prime minister allowed this. In 1991, he sent out India's gold by the plane load to avoid an external payments default. He brought Manmohan Singh back in the system, making reforms easier subsequently. He introduced Yashwant Sinha in politics as his finance minister and let Yashwant Sinha prepare a reform blueprint. Like much else in his regrettably little-known political life, there are hidden stories behind his finding these two long-distance runners, that is Manmohan Singh and Yashwant Sinha. Yashwant Sinha remembers he first met Chandra Shekhar when both had gone to call in on Karpuri Thakur, a former chief minister of Bihar. Sinha, a Bihar cadre IAS officer and now joint secretary surface transport, was planning to leave and work in the voluntary sector. Little did he know that Chandrasekhar had headhunted him. He called him home and lectured him. In an NGO, Chandrasekhar told Yashwant Sinha he could transform one village, maybe a couple of villages, maybe a few villages. But to bring about change at scale, he should join politics, which Sinha did after working at the relief camps for Delhi's Sikh victims in 1984. Remember those great massacres after Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. These were camps for Sikh victims run by Chandrasekhar and George Fernandes. And from where did Manmohan Singh come? Yashwant Sinha says Chandrasekhar was concerned he had no Sikh in his cabinet. And it was a sensitive gap. Remember, 1990-1991, Punjab was burning. This was the worst period of violence in Punjab, even worse than it was in the Bhindranwale era when Bhindranwale was arrived. 1991, almost 15,000 people were killed in Punjab. A very overwhelming percentage of them innocent civilians. That data is available. So a cabinet without a Sikh would have looked really bad. So he appointed Manmohan Singh, just back from his tenure at South Commission, as his chief economic advisor. He could not have made him a minister yet because he did not have any Rajya Sabha seats and had no chance of getting one. So he made him his chief economic advisor and made him regular invitee at cabinet meetings. So a chief economic advisor with the authority mandate to sit in on cabinet meetings. It made his elevation as finance minister seamless for P.V. Narasimha Rao just months later. Chandra Shekhar presided over a most complicated transition and maintained stability in a period where many had imagined the worst in India. Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated midway through the midterm elections, caused by Congress withdrawing support to him on the incredible excuse that he had sent two Haryana policemen to spy on the Gandhis. In fact, I thought about this a little bit more when I watched the first parts of the Hunt, which is running on Sony Live, which is a reconstruction of Rajiv Gandhi's assassination. That's when Chandrasekhar was Prime Minister, and you see somebody playing Chandrasekhar's character in that one, which is a reasonable likeness, I would say, also in speech and style. I know you've figured who we are talking about. 8th July is the death anniversary of Chandrasekhar. He passed away on this day in 2007. In the 1991 elections, his slogan was 40 saal banam 4 mahine. 40 years versus 4 months, because 4 months is when he was actually in power. The rest was as caretaker. The old socialist knew he had zero chance, but was compulsively cheeky. Kuldeep Nair said then, isn't he speaking the truth? What the Congress fellows made in 40 years, his people may have made in 4 months. With his parliamentary strength of about 54 and concentration of power in his own hands, he also kept home and defense ministries with himself, by the way. He gave his opponents a sitter of a slogan against him, Ali Baba or 40 chor, right? आप बोलते हैं 4 महीने versus 40 years, Ali Baba or 40 chor. 40 being a reference to his 53 MPs besides himself. No, Chandrasekhar was no angel. There was much about him that was wrong and rotten, from personal lifestyle to political cynicism and to the empire he built in village Bhonsi in Haryana, about 40-45 kilometers from Delhi, in the name of his dodgy trust, some of it encroaching BSF land. Can you imagine border security force? Somebody can encroach on their land, but he did so. But he was also a born leader with a spine, ideology, and finally the intellect to see the change and be flexible. In his few months as Prime Minister, he was a stronger Prime Minister than most in our post-Indira history. Ask Saifuddin Soz. When Saifuddin Soz's daughter was kidnapped by Kashmiri separatists, Chandrasekhar made a cold call to Nawaz Sharif, then Prime Minister, and asked him persuasively but firmly to make sure she was sent back home safely. He said something like, look, we keep fighting, we do all kinds of nasty things to each other, but we don't mess with each other's children. So that girl has to come back, and she was sent back home. That is how Chandrasekhar operated. This is something that Saifuddin Soz also confirmed on a Walk the Talk interview. There was no on the one hand, on the other hand business with Chandrasekhar. He was among the most prime ministerial of our prime ministers who made his mark in a short term, with the strength of less than 10% in Lok Sabha, as I mentioned earlier. Having tided over an election broken into two by Rajiv's assassination, initiating a robust probe, and handing over power to Narasimha Rao's minority government, he retired into a comfortable, if colorful, personal life. Never to be a nuisance to friend or foe, but a buddy to all. Generally constructive, helpful, oozing good counsel. I had seen and heard him as a firebrand young socialist, leading the campaign against Indira Gandhi post-emergency when I was still a journalism student. Chandrasekhar had started as a Lohiaite, gravitated to Congress as Indira turned socialist, 1969 onwards, and then led a 4-member rebel group of young Turks questioning her, the other 3 being Krishan Kant, who later became Vice President of India, Mohan Dharia and Ramdhan. All 4 were expelled and jailed by her during the emergency. He had an unfulfilled and angry, frustrated political life subsequently. He believes VP Singh, a hypocrite in his view, had stolen the adulation that should have been his, and became Prime Minister in 1989. I got to know him mostly in his post-prime ministerial phase when he had the time and patience. I went to see him several times when he was battling an excruciatingly painful form of myeloma. Even in that state, he would fret endlessly over what he saw as the most dangerous trend in our politics. Leaders of political parties, and what was the dangerous trend? Leaders of political parties no longer talking to each other. The BJP and the Congress have stopped talking, he would say. The left won't talk to the BJP anyway, and Lalu and Mulayam stay clear of each other, as do Mulayam and Mayawati. Karunanidhi and Jayalalitha won't even greet each other. I'm quoting from him, and some of these conversations have been published in national interest much before this first person, second draft was written. And he said, this is no way to run India's politics. It wasn't like this even when the emergency ended and so many of us came out of Indra's prisons. This conversation took place in February 2007 when I dropped by to check on his health. He was happy the NDA had got defeated in 2004, that Sonia Gandhi had decided wisely and magnanimously not to become Prime Minister, as it would have divided India and embittered its politics. He said it would have led to a lot of bitterness हो जाता, कड़वाहट हो जाती. अच्छा किया उन्होंने नहीं लिया Prime Ministership. But even a veteran like him was completely foxed by how polarized Parliament had become now by 2007. At this rate, he said, it might just become impossible to build another coalition in 2009. What is the point of building a VP Singh or a Gowda kind of coalition that will be brought down within months, more by personal antagonism than by ideological differences? In the bitterest of times in the past, he said, the consultative process between the political parties and serious players had not broken down. Most importantly, social graces. Subah sham ka utna baithna, which is social family contact, as he put it, were never lost. But now he was dismayed by how divided the polity had become. Think please, if he was seeing it this way in February of 2007, what he would have said now. He said he did not exactly know where the talks with Pakistan or the US on the nuclear issue were headed, but he trusted the government to look after India's interests as well as anybody else. But will they be able to settle anything unless they take the NDA along? This is when UPA was in power. And he said if they are not even talking with each other, how will India come to any conclusion, any government in India come to any conclusion without being able to get the concurrence of the opposition? Many biographical tributes have been written since to the man who, more than being an accidental prime minister, will be remembered as one of the last great titans of the Indira era, who was both a destroyer and conciliator at the same time. I'm not qualified to write one more. Maybe Yashwant Sinha or Subramanian Swamy. By the way, Swamy was Commerce and Law Minister in Chandra Shekhar's cabinet. One of them should write something on him in the course of time. I wasn't covering national politics in his heyday and had got to know him only lately because he had more time, and if you were curious to learn about Indian politics, there wasn't a better tutor. For years now, he had had a detached view of politics with no stakes of his own except his Lok Sabha seat in Balia, which it seems all other parties conspired to leave alone for him. They always made sure they did not put up a candidate with any chance of defeating him. He was too much of a character, too warm an individual, and more recently, too harmless a politician to have been kept out of parliament. Chandra Shekhar had seen India's evolution from socialism to a free market economy. In fact, he started that process in a manner of speaking. As he had inherited a bankrupt exchequer from VP Singh, he knew socialism of the kind he had believed in, closer to JP's rather than Indira's, was now passé. But he was never bitter. He acknowledged the fact that all old socialists, including committed Lohiaites, had accepted that reality now. But only if Mulayam, Lalu, Mayawati, Nitish would somehow come together, he would wonder. He'd be pleased whenever those equations turned positive, but they never remained positive for long. The last time I called on Chandra Shekhar, he joked about how times had changed with India's economy. There was a time, he said, when foreign exchange was so short, so scarce, he had to mortgage India's gold reserves. Now they say they have too much foreign exchange. So much they don't know what to do with it. So they send it out by the plane load or what? This wasn't long after Atal Bihari Vajpayee started what is known as LRS scheme, liberalized remittance scheme, whereby any Indian citizen from their tax paid income can spend, transfer, invest a certain amount of money in foreign exchange overseas every year. At this point, it's $2.5 lakh per year. All this changed, but not for a moment did he see this as some kind of a defeat for his long-held socialist beliefs. He only laughed like a child from his bed, tubes and all. Chandra Shekhar was probably the last of the greats in our politics who had seen the picture from all sides, and he represented a generation of very tough and yet very flexible leaders that fought among themselves, yet networked and partied with everybody. And to this episode of First Person Second Draft, there is a postscript. Chandra Shekhar left me with a mystery that only Sonia Gandhi can resolve now. He said to me, as Atal Bihari Vajpayee crossed paths with Sonia Gandhi in Rashtrapati Bhavan after losing in 2004, he had affectionately advised her not to become Prime Minister. Atalji's view, he said, was, this is Chandra Shekhar speaking and I am quoting from him, "Anarth ho jayega." It will be a blunder, as nobody will accept it and nobody will let her rule. I subsequently asked Vajpayee if this was true. Typical of him, he twisted his eyebrows and asked, who had told me? I said, Chandra Shekhar. Bahut shaitan hai wo, is all he said, no more. He wasn't committing to me on this at all. Chandra Shekhar is gone. Vajpayee is gone also now. Only Sonia has the answer. Maybe she will write a memoir someday, or somebody around her will do it, and we will either know the full truth from her or something that is close to the truth.